She sat facing a wall every day and no one knew why. In the small, quiet town of Maplewood, there was a community center where elderly residents spent their afternoons. Most of them played cards, watched television, or gathered in small circles to share stories of the past. But Margaret, a 78-year-old woman with silver hair and hollow eyes, did none of that. Every single day, without fail, she pulled her chair to the far corner of the room, faced the wall, and sat in complete silence. The staff had tried to engage her. Other residents had attempted to invite her into their conversations. But Margaret never turned around. She never responded. She simply sat there, still as stone, staring at a wall that had nothing to offer but faded beige paint. People eventually stopped trying. They assumed she was lost in her grief, or perhaps too deep in her own world to be reached. They let her be, and in doing so, they let her disappear while still being present among them. That was the reality of Margaret's days, invisible, unheard, and utterly alone in a room full of people. Then came Daniel. He was a 24-year-old volunteer who had just signed up to spend his weekends at the community center as part of a social work program. On his very first day, he noticed Margaret immediately. While everyone else moved and laughed and filled the space with noise, she sat motionless in her corner, her back to the world. Daniel asked one of the staff members about her. The response was casual, almost dismissive. "Oh, that's just Margaret. She's been like that for years. She doesn't talk to anyone." Daniel nodded slowly, but something about that answer didn't sit right with him. He couldn't accept that a human being had simply decided to turn her back on the world for no reason at all. He believed there was always a reason, and he believed that reason deserved to be heard. The next day, Daniel didn't try to pull Margaret into a group or hand her a pamphlet about activities. He simply took a chair, carried it quietly to her corner, and sat beside her, also facing the wall. He said nothing. He just sat there with her, sharing her view of that empty, unremarkable surface. Margaret stiffened slightly, but didn't move. After 20 minutes of silence, Daniel softly said, "It's not such a bad wall, really." He wasn't mocking her. His voice was gentle, almost thoughtful. Margaret said nothing, but she didn't ask him to leave either. Daniel took that as enough for one day and quietly returned to his other duties. He came back the next weekend and did the same thing. And the weekend after that, each time he sat beside her, facing the wall, sometimes saying a small observation, sometimes saying nothing at all. He never pushed. He never pitied. He simply showed up and stayed. About 3 weeks into this quiet ritual, something shifted. Daniel had just settled into his chair beside her when Margaret spoke. Her voice was dry and brittle, like a door hinge that hadn't been used in years. She said, "My son used to sit facing a wall when he was upset. I never understood why. I used to beg him to talk to me. He never did. And then one day he was gone. And I never got the chance to just sit with him the way he needed." The words fell into the air between them like something precious and long buried. Daniel didn't rush to fill the silence. He let her words breathe. Then he quietly said, "I think he would have loved knowing his mother understood him in the end." Margaret turned her head and looked at Daniel for the very first time. Her eyes, which had seemed empty from a distance, were filled with something deep and trembling. A tear moved down her cheek, slow and quiet. She didn't sob. She simply let it fall, the way only someone who has held grief for a very long time finally allows it to move. After that day, Margaret still sat in her corner sometimes, but she no longer sat completely alone. And slowly, gradually, she began to turn her chair, just slightly, until one afternoon, without any announcement, she pulled it all the way around and joined the circle of people near the window. She never explained the change. She didn't need to. Daniel knew. The staff knew. Even the other residents, who hadn't paid much attention, seemed to sense that something quietly miraculous had happened in that corner of the room. Margaret had not been broken. She had simply been waiting for someone willing to enter her world before asking her to return to theirs. And Daniel, with nothing more than patience, presence, and a chair facing a wall, had given her exactly that. If this story touched your heart the way it touched ours, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it today, and subscribe to Kindness Corner Stories. Because the world always has room for one more act of kindness.